Welcome, you are watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. Ukraine has risen by another 5 positions in the Doing Business rating and is now in 71st place. In total, over the last 5 years, Ukrainian business has gone up by 41 positions in the rating. To talk more about the perspectives of business development in Ukraine, we're joined in the studio today by Yaroslav Gregirchak. He's the Deputy Business Ombudsman of Ukraine. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, Antonina. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk how important the fact that Ukraine has risen another 5 steps in the rating, in the Doing Business rating. How important is this for Ukraine? What's the message behind this climbing up the stairs?
First of all, that the climbing up is moving on steadily for the past 4 years at least, whereby in 2016 we've been 83rd. Right now we are indeed 71st, and it kind of opens up this belief that the trend will continue indeed. And certainly 71st is not the one where we all would like to see Ukraine being placed at. President, Prime Minister has repeatedly referred to at least top 50, and this is as a message from the top governmental officials repeats itself for a little while already. The significance of the rating itself is that it's being used by many international investors as a certain point of reference. Indeed, the ranking as such is not an easy exercise that World Bank commenced, I believe, back in 2002, when they decided to incorporate this methodology based on 10 indicators, each of which is based on its own but a very generic scenario, which would allow to compare about 190 countries. They have a cut-off date, which is kind of the end of May. Then they analyze data, and then they, at the end of October, release the information. And that, in this particular case, was the Ukraine's ranking for 2018. But when it comes to the correct interpretation, of course, of this exercise, the one has to be very mindful of the fact that those progressive things that has actually happened in Ukraine, for instance, insolvency reform, that occurred after May, end of the May this year, will actually not be incorporated in the Ukraine's ranking as far as 2019 is concerned.
Which means Ukraine has even more to offer. Am I right?
And we all have to be very cautious and reasonable when we're interpreting the ranking. And when something good happens, we've got to realize at which particular point in time during a year that occurred.
Let's listen to our President Petro Poroshenko of his interpretation of our results in the ranking.
Мета наша увійти в 50 найкращих.
Our goal is to get in the top 50, and with each passing year, we see it becoming more and more real. I want to thank the Parliament once again for the new bankruptcy codex that was approved recently. If everything goes as declared, I will sign it within 2 weeks and it will come into power. This is a substantial step towards solving the issue of the financial capacity of payers and security of the bankruptcy procedures.
See, even President Poroshenko is saying what you've just said, that some things just happen after the World Bank has, calculated and collected all the data. Let's be more precise about the categories.
Right.
What kind of categories are we, let's say, lacking something, or our results leave much to be desired?
The lowest position is 145th place in the index called Resolving Insolvency. But again, insolvency as an indicator is hopefully going to be pretty much improved with the insolvency/bankruptcy reform that the President has just mentioned. However, this will be reflected 1 year down the road, when the Ukraine's ranking for 2020 will be released. And of course, we are all hopeful that in the meantime, as we speak until the end of May 2019, there will be many further reforms made in various areas to improve the aggregate perception of the Ukraine's ranking for 2020.
What's the category Ukraine can boast of the best result in?
Which is dealing with construction permits. There has been much of the deregulation made in that sphere. The equally, more or less equally ranked is Getting Credit Index, which speaks about the opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses to use different types of movable property as collateral in order to attract debt financing from financial institutions, and equally for financial institutions to have their status of a secured creditor registered with the respective movable registry. It was being said, however, that this Getting Credit Index has been historically the best as far as Ukraine's position amongst these 10 indexes is concerned for quite a while already, because the respective reform has been made back in 2001. Yeah.
Okay, but how are we doing in the category of international trade? We're quite successful in that as well, am I right?
We used to be lagging behind. We used to be 119th in doing business 2018. And now we have seen improvement to the tune of 41 place, and now we are 78. And the index speaks about various logistical factors that determine the cost and timing of both importing and exporting certain type of goods in that scenario that the World Bank imagined. And indeed, that's where we have seen the most of the improvement. Another one, which is attributable to the enforcement and implementation of the judicial reform, is the index called Enforcing Contracts, where we have seen improvement to the tune of 25 positions, whereby we used to be 82 and now we are 57 in the world. So that's important to see a certain trend. And of course, if we see comparably good progress in those indexes where we used to be lagging behind, meaning that it's more than 20 places or maybe 25 places, even though in some other indexes we might be fluctuating back and forth to the tune of 2, 3, 5, even 7 places, this is not dramatically wrong or dangerous as far as Ukraine's aggregate ranking is concerned, because we've got to understand that the ranking as an exercise is aimed at comparing countries, each of whose is also engaged in its own business environment improvement exercise. It's not that other countries are not making good reforms. Effectively, the ranking is a good tool to see how countries are competing for this good business environment type of a marketplace that they comprise.
Judging by Doing Business rating 2019, New Zealand is doing the best with the reforms. And in the best 10, in the top 10, there is Georgia. It's the only country out of post-Soviet countries that made it to the top 10. Now, what's the Georgia secret?
If I were to wrap up and give a very kind of eloquent answer, is their ability to proceed with the necessary reforms, not in the evolutionary, but in rather revolutionary way. Yeah.
Should Ukraine take any experience from Georgia?
Certainly something is worth being borrowed, but you know, it's a matter of certain policy choices to be structured and implemented in the right way, because there is also a body of thought that claims that those things that has been implemented very rapidly are not necessarily ended up as the soils, as the seeds in the right soil. You know, there might be a bit of a...
Meaning they're not effective in the long run?
Meaning that they might not necessarily be indeed properly perceived by society or otherwise. Whereas, arguably, if you're doing something in an evolutionary way, that means that those changes that are being implemented, they are sort of irreversible. However, it would be unfair to assume that evolutionary way means slow way. So the balance has to be in there.
Okay. To what extent would you say business in Ukraine is actually protected?
Depends which aspects of protection we are talking about. If we are talking about judicial protection, in a sense of scenario that is employed by the World Bank for the purposes of enforcing contract index, we are doing pretty well with what the judicial reform has implemented. If we're talking and we're taking a bit more wider look at the perception of things that are believed to be negatively affecting the quality of business environment, in which we at the Business Ombudsman Council are taking care of, for instance, this aspect of pressure that is inflicted by law enforcers, which is something that is totally absent, indeed, from the exercise or from the format of methodology offered by the World Bank in the Doing Business ranking. Things need to be properly taken care of, and they are, with the recently adopted and signed by the President last week, the so-called Moscow Stop 2 law, which is aimed at strengthening legal grounds for bringing to personal liability some of those law enforcers that are acting in an illicit way vis-à-vis business. Which also demonstrates that, indeed, if you are a World Bank and you are doing this comprehensive exercise aimed at comprehensive, at least in terms of the scope of the countries that are captured by the ranking, inadvertently, your ranking, your positions are doomed to bear certain elements of subjective view on things, because you've got to compare the entire world against each other, right?
Yeah.
And you cannot capture all of the specificities that are attributable or not attributable to a particular country. So that's good overall, that we are paying more attention to this and other rankings, that we are talking about them, that we are more aware about how to properly interpret them, that we are more aware about the scope that each of these rankings is carrying with itself. That is just helpful for us to be sufficiently comprehensive when we are looking at our own state of things here in Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your point of view. Thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure.
That was Yaroslav Gregirchak. He's the Deputy Business Ombudsman of Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV for the rest.